Hi, there's another handout today. Do people have it? As far as it's called a data sheet. It's one I planned to hand out actually last time, but it tells what the whole course is about, and the main thing I think some of you will be interested in knowing is the purpose of the course and the method of grading it. And so just wanted to reiterate something I said quickly before, that the main thing in this course will be that we'd like you all each to write a term paper on a subject of your own choice. And this has there's an extra gimmick here that I don't mind. In fact, it's fine if you also had to write this paper anyway. The main thing is that now you get an extra incentive to write it very beautifully. And somebody talked to me on Wednesday that he's writing a book on physics, and it's okay to turn in a chapter of the book for his term paper. That's all right, yes. But you don't all have to turn in that much. I was thinking, though, of something about 10 to 20 pages. And the main thing that you should know now is that on Wednesday, November 18th, we'd like a rough draft, something that can be turned in for the sake of criticism and review before it's too late to change anything. And the main thing is that you should have a good something that you're interested in writing, and you have a good idea as to a kind of form that it's supposed to fulfill. It doesn't have to be any specific form. When I say term paper, it could be any really all kinds of different things are possible. I was thinking of having a contest for the best Pascal program that was also a sonnet. Now that would probably not be best for this course, but that's a form, you know, that if anybody read the Golden Gate, the novel with all the table of contents and everything is in 14-line stanzas and so on. Well, you should be able to do that with a Pascal program too, right? But there are many different kinds of forms that you have, and one of them is a chapter in a book. One of them is a journal paper. One of them is a exposition of something that you think ought to be explained well. You should have your audience in mind, who you're writing it for. It could be. It doesn't have to be me at all. It could be any particular kind of audience that you have firmly in mind as somebody worthwhile that you want to write something for. But that's the main thing is that you have some specific genre in mind, but I don't have one in mind, and just do a good job on whatever that is. There's another possibility I should mention is computer programs. A well-written computer program with documentation is a kind of literature. That of course that's probably too hard to do that. I mean it's not as but any kind of technical writing is okay in this term paper as long as it's not trivial, I guess. I used to assign my kids. I said they should write 50 words. Originally it was a week or I'd turn off the TV set, and they had to turn in their essays, and then it got to be 100 words and so on. When my son discovered once, he wrote about the 49ers game, and he said in the first quarter the 49ers scored 7 points and the other team scored 3 points. In the second quarter, the 49ers, and he got up to 50 words very easily that way. So then I had to make a rule: no writing about sports events unless you use varied vocabulary or something. Anyway, you get the idea that the idea in the term paper is something that you're interested in doing a good job, and not for me to really spell out the formal requirements which you look over like a lawyer and try to optimize the minimum amount of time to do it. Okay. Now,
lawyers actually try to maximize the amount of time they spend on it.
Okay, minimize the amount of something or other. Maximizing is always the opposite of minimizing, or minimizing the negative. Okay, now, as I said, I want to go through the other papers that were turned in, and because they raised interesting issues. I think, in fact, almost everything that I'll be mentioning here was something that at least 2 people did. So it's worth noting. And but I do want to be sure to get through it all today. I'm not going to drag on this whole course talking about L of C and P, which can get pretty tiresome. So this will be today. We'll have done with non-increasing vectors. Okay. Now, all right. Let's see this one. See if I can figure out what I did here. First of all, there's a colon here. We show the contrapositive colon. We assume that and so on. Now this is a point that I don't have much support for outside of my. But I've always wondered, should you capitalize the letter after a colon or not? And probably you'll get different people telling you different things. And I've evolved something that's worked for me rather well in the past few years, and I suggest it to you. But if you don't like it, you can lump it. And that is, I capitalize the thing after a colon if it's a sentence, if it's a complete sentence, subject and predicate. But if it's a fragment of a sentence that doesn't, then I leave it lowercase. So in this case, I would have capitalized the we here because it's going to turn out to be a sentence. But that's just an extra clue to the reader that you know sort of that this colon was actually a pointer to another sentence rather than a pointer to the completion of the present sentence.
Question.
A question on that? Yeah.
Do you throw in an extra space before the capital letter and you do that?
Well, actually, Tech has already thrown in an extra space after the colon. It treats a colon and a period but that would help too. If you're on a typewriter or something like that, yeah. Then a double space at the end of a sentence is a kind of a neat thing sometimes, sure. And then it would be even harder to put a lowercase letter then after an extra space. No, that's a thought that I have. Now,
how about if the sentence is like A less than B, where A and B are variables in lowercase?
What now?
How about if the sentence is A is less than B?
The sentence is A is less than B?
That follows the colon. Yeah.
That's a sentence starting with a symbol.
Right, so you don't want to.
I would rewrite it. Yeah. If it's displayed, it's okay. Now let's see. I have a point here. One pass, no look ahead. That's in the previous. It suffices to prove that L of CP contained in A of N, C not equal empty, and C and A and imply imply grunt. Okay, so it's not clear when I was reading this that this word imply would change the whole ball game. In other words, it suffices to prove that, and then we were listing things, and all of a sudden I was thinking that I'm supposed to prove that L of C and P is contained in this, but I'm not really proving that. I'm proving that that all of this imply that, which is impossible, I think, to read this sentence without look ahead. And so some way of giving a clue to what was happening, that the 3 conditions, L of C and P, so on, imply. Then if you say that, it probably helps a little bit anyway. Okay. Now let's see. There's another thing that's very common. I think it's probably because let's see. I put some in here. Unfortunately, this format is wider than our TV screen. What do I have an and? Oh, sorry, I can't remember why I said C. Oh, yeah, here it is. We have BI less than BI plus 1 for some B in P, and I and 1 less than or equal I less than N. Now, I would have put an extra sum in here, and sum 1 less than or equal I. Some people don't like to say sum and then give a relation where the object of the sum is I. but depending on our audience, it would be okay, I think, to make that much abbreviated. But here it looks like almost this is confusing without saying whether you want all I or some I in this range. I think that that's hard to understand what you mean. So you have bi for some b and some I. If you wanted to be completely clear about it, you'd say and some I in the range 1 less than or equal I less than n. And then let's see. Then k greater than or equals 0, comma, because c is contained in a sub n, comma, and hence such and such. I just thought the word and here was a little bit wordy. It just, for me, the flow I would have crossed out. I would have said then k, then something, because something, hence something. The and hence didn't, but I can't explain why. I just thought that would be a small improvement. Okay, here's an interesting thing about commas. The lack of them. Observe first that if L of C and P is a subset of A n, then so is C because C is okay. Now, this is a complicated German. I guess they would call it Schachtelsatzes. Schachtelsatzes is not quite same, but it's got a lot of things because first that if something so, then so is because. I would at least put a comma after C here in order to take a breath, and we got certainly putting in too many commas would spoil it because you'd have to rewrite the sentence. It would sound as involuted as it is. But if you leave out the commas, you can at least read this at high speed and it's simple enough to internalize. But then you need a comma at least. There's if, then, and because. All that was I think going a little too much there. Here it says, to that end, assume by contradiction that. Remember, we had this trouble the other day. There are nicer ways to say we're going to prove something by contradiction, and we saw some examples already, and there'll be some more coming up. Okay. Otherwise, this was actually rather good. Oh yeah, one more comment on this. The end of the proof. I think Paul Helmish was the guy who invented this idea of having a symbol at the end of a proof, and it's pretty nice in a textbook actually when you know that something about the structure there. You don't have to say QED or saying this completes the proof and so on. So you can just put this little symbol there, and I would have just put a little space between the period and the symbol. And there's sometimes people use a solid bar, but anything like that is a fairly good idea. But why does it follow the period immediately? That doesn't seem quite right to me. I don't know. Minor points, obviously, mixed up with some other that are more important. Okay, let's see. I like this. Now, to prove this. Let us assume the opposite and see what happens. I think that's kind of nice. Why do I have where in there? I have a note here that I can understand. Forget that. Okay, now let's see. Sometimes there's a question, should we put the word that in there? Now, to prove that P is, let us assume the opposite. Here I don't feel the need for it. It's a matter of rhythms, things that I don't fully understand. But here was a situation where it sounded very nice because maybe it's because prove is a one-syllable word and assume is a two-syllable word. I don't think that's it. But now to prove that P, it wouldn't be bad to put the word that in there, but it sounds okay to me now. Sometimes I feel strongly that I got to put the word that in, and I hope I don't get too hung up on it in this course. I'll try not to bore you with it too much. Anyway, the main thing here though was a kind of a nice break in the action, saying see what happens. It's sort of let's do an experiment. That's a reasonable thing to do, I think. to show the method by which a proof is sort of unrolls by itself instead of afterwards. Now this you can do if the proof is simple like this one is. If you had to let all proofs unroll by themselves, then you couldn't prove very complicated theorems sometimes. That. Let us take as given that such and such and P and C equals 0. We will show that this implies that C is contained in A and A. Sometimes there's too many that's in a row, and it's too bad. But we will show that this implies that. I would try to get around it by maybe saying both or something. I would say that we will show that this implies both C. Something I don't know. Something. I do feel a need for a beat in here after the word implies, and perhaps, but there is you can also put in that so often it gets tiresome. Now here's a present tense. So I said I was going to talk a little about tenses here. We assume now that P is such and such, and will show that this leads to a contradiction. So we got so now. We got this, and then later this will lead. This is going to. We're going to show something, somehow it read awkward to me because we're mixing tenses. We're assuming the we is omitted in the second part of the sentence. It sort of carries over the same subject, but here's the subject using once with the present tense and once with a future tense. So it might be better to say something like, we assume now, hoping to show that this leads to contradiction or something like that, in hopes of showing that this leads. I don't know. Hopefully. There's another handout. And I have a handout about hopefully that's come here, and I plan to discuss this next week. Now, the thing I want to discuss about this handout, there's some content to it. It talks about the word hopefully, but the main thing I want to talk about is the style of the writing in the handout itself. The form is much more important to me, and the way the beautiful way these points are covered. These would apply to mathematical writing as well as writing about English, and so this is a sort of a model little essay of about how to write, explain a technical point, and the technical points that are made are also relevant. But mostly, I like just the form of the writing. We'll talk about it next week, sometime. Okay, now here was another case where elements would be better components again. It's because we have elements and components both. We talked about that on Friday, and there was one thing that the person here decided not to introduce the variable k in the proof, but to keep copying out ci minus cj plus 1 over and over each time, you see, in all these proofs, while the original had a k in there. And I didn't think that's a win in this case. The formulas just get long, and it's easier to do a lot of the manipulations at a higher level with k. So I would have said where v is defined as v equals c plus ku, k equals ci minus cj plus 1. And I think then the rest of it, a lot of this case would have gone in here, shortened everything, and we can recall the definition of k then when we finally get to the punchline. But carrying it all the way through is sort of violates the principle of name and conquer that helps to make mathematics intelligible. Lemma 1 here I would have capitalized, as I say, it's the proper name. Okay. Next. Here's something about tech again. There's I would have put a tie in my tech file after the word of and before a sub n. You see how a sub n is a little I don't know if it's called a widow or an orphan or whatever. It's all alone there at the very much anticlimax by itself at the end of the paragraph. Now, there are places that people would not break a line if they were doing it on a typewriter, and this is one of them. And I made a study of what happened when computers took over the typesetting job in journals. And the ACM journal used to be done by hand, where everybody would make a manual decision where to break a line. You'd push a button on this monotype machine, and it would eject the line. It would be set in lead and go to the next line. And I counted the 1,000 pages of the Journal of the ACM in those days as to how many times I found breaks like this with this anticlimax afterwards. And then I made the same count. I think there were something like 4 in 1,000 pages. Okay, and I made the same count after computerized typesetting came in the 70s, and it was something like 54. So there was, now it might have been that people started writing sentences that had more occurrences of these things. I haven't really got a controlled sample here, but it seems to me that something was done when people were using a human judgment on breaking lines that was lost. So I tie it together now. In tech, there's a symbol that in plain text there's a convention that if you type a tilde instead of a space, then it's an unbreakable space. It's a space that will be everything like every other space, except that the line won't end there. And anyway, I discovered that this was happening in computer typesetting. That many times this happens much more in mathematics and other kinds of writing. And these funny breaks were occurring more often, and so I said, I wonder if printers ever had a name for this kind of a space that you don't break after. Is there a way to specify to the best commercial typesetting systems that have a space and don't do it? And I met a guy from York Graphics who was one of the better composition houses, and he said, yeah, we call this an auxiliary space, and we sometimes use it. Then I found actually some literature. I had to go back into the 19th century and found a French book on typesetting, which actually talked about this, that you wouldn't, if you were mentioning Henri the Fourth, however you say fourth in French, you wouldn't break a line between those two. Louis XIV and so on. You would, and he gave several other examples where it would be bad form to break a line. So anyway, auxiliary space didn't turn me on, so I called it a tie. And when I'm now proofreading a paper that I've typeset or Phyllis, and I see a place where I would rather not break there, I just put this symbol there, and that means put a tilde in your manuscript, and then the tech won't do that. I think other systems are going to be getting this, and it turned out to be very simple to do this almost without thinking as you're typing. So I would have put a tie, for example, as I'm typing this, I would have put a tie there. Usually if I have an and followed by one other thing, a subset of and to the end, I probably would have typed an of there. And Phyllis does this automatically. Of P here, I would have put a tie. And a few places in the manuscript, I get to use that, usually at the end of a sentence where there's a one symbol thing coming in there. Sometimes, like if I had to put a tie here, I wouldn't have put it before the a sub n, I would have put it after the a sub n. I'd rather have the break after since, but I don't feel too strongly about that one. But anyway, there are cases where ties definitely help. This was actually...
Question?
Yeah.
When you look through the 1,000 pages for awkward breaks, was it subjective or objective? I mean, did you have a spelled out criterion for what constituted an awkward break?
It was subjective. I call it psychologically a bad break, where somehow it would be a letdown to get to the other end of the line and see that thing by itself. This was first called to my attention by readers of the original tech manual in the late 70s, when I would refer to chapter, and then it would say 1, period. And they said, Don, you got the best typesetting system, but why does it do that? and then I became sensitive to it, and that's why I made my experiment.
Why isn't it in tech automatically to take care of problems like that?
Well, it does. There is no automatic rule, I don't think. I mean, it's a matter of judgment. Okay, if it's a very short word, you could probably predict that nobody would want to break there. That's true. But that really doesn't happen that often with a short word, because tech pays a penalty for the number of lines in a paragraph. So it much prefers to set a 2-line paragraph than a 3-line paragraph. So it sort of said it sort of needed a 3-line paragraph, but then it took the best 3-line paragraph it could find. It didn't have this on the end. So you could do that by setting your the space at the end of a paragraph, and say that you don't want that to stretch so easily. It stretches with no penalty at all at the moment. But that's yeah. I find though that it occurs in the middle of a sentence as well as in the as well as at the end of sentences, but it's in the noise level. It's not something that I have to even be conscious of after the first few times of putting it in. Anyway, it's something that can be done for spit and polish. Now, you can't see it too well on TV, but boldface is used here. These vectors are bold. The C and P are bolder than the other ones. We have a nice black. This laser printer had a real good ink ribbon here, so that B is bold compared to the other one there. And so a person's using that aspect of typography. It seems to help a little bit on this one, but it's not terribly necessary if you work with a lot of vector. I don't know, but it did help, I think. And I kind of like this saying here: the proof that P containing AN is by contradiction. Remember, we had this problem of how to state this, this sets everything up, and it's a present tense. It says it is by contradiction instead of it will be by contradiction. That's fine. For which PI less than PJ, PI and PJ weren't strictly speaking defined there, but I only had one real serious complaint about this, and that is I said oops when I got to this line here. You see, here's two formulas right in a row. Got to put something in there in between to separate those formulas. I don't know what it would say. Component dj must be greater than or equal to n. But it's not too nice to have those two in a row. Other than that, this was fairly good. Still, I can't say snare. Okay, here's what did I mark this? Parallel. Okay, we are given that sentence. By taking m equals 0 and 2, we see that such and such. By transitivity of C, we have that. Okay, two sentences in a row with the same thing, but there's a sort of a parallelism there. Why the comma the second one and not the first? I don't know. But I did. But this was reasonable. I would have. I'm not sure whether these are new paragraphs or not. This it looks like each one is a new paragraph, but there's no way for me to really tell. But here I would definitely start a new paragraph with this transition. Now we shall prove that P contained in N, and this leads me to comment about the word shall. The style of the art of computer programming that my copy editor taught me was to say shall when I'm making a definition. We shall say that. We shall call P, and it somehow didn't sound formal when I read it in the galley proofs, even though shall is a rather formal word. We don't talk that way. Now, otherwise I typically would say will, not meaning we will do it, but just it wasn't, somehow shall sounded right in the definitions the way that copy editor drummed it into my mind. Now in the book that I'm writing now with Orrin, he doesn't like shall. It sounds very formal to him, and he comes from a generation closer to the audience that we're trying to reach here. So So it must be that shall is a lot more. It goes into my consciousness. I mean, it goes into my head without being conscious that it's formal. While with younger readers, it's different. So probably will would sound better to a young what do you call it, a student of the 80s. Okay, now some people use arrows over their vectors. Vector T with instead of just like a typographic convention, putting it in boldface, and that I suppose that can be helpful if you're used to it. Physicists seem to like it, and yeah, it's all right. It doesn't go. I mean, some people put a boldface tilde underneath every vector. There's all kinds of different symbols, and depending on what you're used to, go for it and figure out what your audience is used to, what you like. Here's on this one. This is a remark written in the margin by whoever did this paper. Say, I know Cj and Pij is confusing. Here it says, suppose there is a vector P sub I and P, which is not in A sub n. Of course, this is that, of course. Why call it P sub I? Why not call it P? Yeah. I know, it's confusing. All right. And again, here was the idea. It says future tense. We will use the proof to show, or we. It's okay. We use a proof wouldn't sound too good here. By contrast, we can use a proof, I suppose.
How does we prove this by contradiction?
We prove this by contradiction. Yeah, that's rather good. Yeah, in fact, use a proof is a little bit wordy, isn't it? Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Here's somebody who loves colons. Lemma. Proof. We prove each result separately, colon. C containing N, colon. Define this as follows, colon. This is really a win for colon, okay? So, oh no, here they get into comma mode. Okay, right. Therefore, comma, something, comma, and since, comma, by hypothesis, comma, and such, comma, we have it. All right. Yeah, you can do without a few of these commas. Why you have this and since in there? I would probably throw this after, since such and such by hypothesis. It probably, because otherwise there's too much. It's just broken up too much, and a person can wait to find out that it's by hypothesis until after it's been stated. Okay, so you can get rid of the colons by just. For example, this one isn't really needed. Okay, this one I would definitely take out. We have such and such. That's part of the sentence. It just completes the sentence, and it doesn't have to have a colon in there. But this define it as follows. The colon is good there. I'm not against all colons, just some. And because that's the end of a sentence, and now we have a colon. We're pointing to the thing that we're going to do in the following way. Mm-hmm. Now, here's something that several people did, and I wonder now. Look at this. It says Qj greater than Qi, and then n greater than or equal j greater than I greater than equal 1. But the vector Q has been listed explicitly 1, 2, up to n. Now, does something strike you about this? Here we're seeing everything displayed left to right, 1, 2, up to n. But somehow, when we give this condition, we're displaying the subscripts in the opposite order. It violates, it would be much nicer, I think, to say Qi less than Qj. Unless you're into real dominance, you like to always say greater than. You don't like the word less than. And then you could rewrite this one, coming back that way in the order in which it's already been presented, because then somebody can see that you're having a less than relation in there, which you didn't want. The definition was given in terms of greater than or equals. Otherwise, it doesn't look like much of a violation until you got here and saw saw which way the ideas are going. So you get to choose the way to present an inequality, and try to do it in a way that's meaningful.
Isn't the 1 less than and less than equal to n also somewhat redundant?
Yeah, that's true, because it's not really. It's right. We're not writing a computer program here. We're communicating with an intelligent being who would probably understand for some I less than j, because otherwise they're undefined. Yeah, good point. Now, several other people also did this. We shall truly, given any increasing vector like q, it is always possible to add enough copies and so on. Now, increasing is probably not a good term there, because it's really only increasing partially. It's not totally non-increasing, but it's not totally increasing either necessarily. Non-decreasing, yeah. I could call it a partial. I could get by with it by saying it's a partially increasing vector like q. It's always possible to add enough copies or something like that. Okay, and there's quite a few quotes in here. I guess if you want to, it's okay to have a few quotes, but maybe I would say any partially increasing without putting them in quotes like q, and then I could say maybe enough in quotes it to be a little cute, and then say a partially increasing resultant vector. But to have three cute things in quotes in one sentence is a little too cute. Okay. I like the way this ended. Just for synchronization, it keeps the reader. This proof seems to do a rather good job of keeping the track of where we are and so on. And it says this completes the second part of our proof. Was a reasonable way to lock everything up. If I were, by the way, inside tech, I would have put a tie here and there, and here and stuff, one other comma, I would leave out this comma. Therefore, I wouldn't say therefore, L cannot be. I would just say therefore. Right.
How do you feel about those double closing parentheses?
Double closing parentheses. That's not too good. Yeah, that's interesting. It was here that he introduced it. So we got ready for it here. Remember definition 1. That's an interesting point here. It says remember definition 1. It's a injunction to the reader. Remember definition 1. It's kind of it's a little bit of break in style if you go from we to you, but it seemed to read fine. And then, since we have that, then we remember the word remember. So this sounded okay. Now, but it is maybe awkward to have parentheses inside of parentheses to some audiences. It depends on the tone. What?
Would you say definition 2?
I would. Well, since it did have a parenthesis in the definition, so I can't just leave off the. If I were able to make the definition without parentheses, that would be okay. But the only other solution, I think, is to take out the parenthesis around this remember definition 1 and make it a dash or something like that.
Question.
Or another sentence. Yeah. Bye.
Isn't it standard form if you have nested parentheses like that, to make the outside one brackets?
I'm glad you asked that. There was a time when it was standard form to go from parentheses to brackets to braces, and then I'm not sure what they did next. And then mathematicians started using braces and brackets for semantical purposes, so that braces and brackets were different from parentheses. Like, you use braces around a set, and you use brackets for the greatest integer or whatever it is, or for a subscript or something like this. Then Fortran came along, and everybody realized that actually, if you just have parentheses, you can still figure it out, which matches with which, in principle, anyway. Okay. Now, however, typesetters, when they have parentheses inside of parentheses, will actually make a large parenthesis. Will make this parenthesis a little bit bigger, especially in a math formula, like if you're saying min of parenthesis f of x, g of x, or something like that. These are slightly larger parentheses that they'll typeset for that. But I would never go to min of bracket f of x, g of x now, unless I was writing something for third graders whose teacher had learned this old convention and still thinks it's correct or something like that. But it's really gone. This whole idea of changing parentheses to braces and brackets and so on is very obsolete and dangerous, because semantics have now been the world is short of delimiters, and people are packing interesting meanings into delimiters these days. So different sizes of parentheses are better than different kinds of parentheses. I think very strongly about that.
Another question?
Yeah.
With the remember definition 2 further up,
yeah.
Isn't that a complete sentence?
Definition 1.
Should that be punctuated and capitalized and everything?
No, because it's thrown in as a clause. I don't know. Yeah. If you could, if so, you would put the period here and then you have here. But I don't know. It's short enough that I think putting in, I don't know. Maybe I guess I don't like it as much as I did when I first saw it, but it didn't hurt me too much to see that in there. As I write, in my handwritten manuscript. By the way, I have to confess that I don't enter my original draft. My very first creation is very rarely done at a computer. Can a professor of computer science confess not to using computers for everything? But then I type it from my pencil draft, and I change it as I go. And one of the common changes I make is to remove parentheses. Things that sounded parenthetical to me when I first wrote them aren't very parenthetical, or they don't sound right in parentheses when I read them at speed. So putting too many things in parentheses can be a stylistic thing that'll get very tiresome in a few pages. But having it once in a while is okay. I'm running out of time.
Question?
Yeah, question?
On previous paper.
This one, before this one?
The yellow one.
Yellow?
Yeah, well, they should be the yellow one. There is a for some I.
Where are we?
Let's see, maybe it's not this one. No.
You want to go?
It? Yeah, right. For some I less than j.
Where are we?
Up a little, right there.
Here?
Right.
Given any increasing vector like q, it is also, for some I less than j, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it's actually for some I and for some j, such that they satisfy this condition, but how should one, is this okay?
Yeah, I could say for some I less than j, I think that's okay. But if I it's really for some I and some j such that I less than j, or for some I and j such that I less than j, I'm used enough to this. Maybe other people think it's going too fast.
Now, what about other type of more cumbersome formulas?
I personally don't mind stringing together two equal signs in a row, for example. Things like that.
If it had been something like for I I equals say the scaling function of r cosine of j, times whatever, a big mess like that.
Then I would have to reformulate it, yeah. But the main point is I wanted to get this condition out in a meaningful way, but in a hurry, because I and j were the undefined things in the preceding phrase. I mean, qi less than qj, I and j aren't defined yet, and so I want to say as quick as possible what I and j are in some way that won't confuse the flow of the discussion, and I think that does it for some I less than j for a person who is sophisticated enough to be interested in L of C and P in the first place. All right, now I put the word that in here. Let us assume that, and so on. Sorry, but now here you'd see they did it. Good. Let's assume that P is not a subset of A sub n. It worked. In other words, there is an n tuple. N is in the wrong font here. Would be better to put it in italics, like the letter N. The word tuple is kind of interesting. It's a new word in English, been invented in the last 10 or 20 years, I think. And now here is really, there exist indices I1 and I2. Now this person was just trying to put me on here, such that x sub I sub 1 is less than x sub I sub 2. Okay, yes?
Question about n tuple. If I say the nth component or so.
Yes.
Is this like
Nth is fine.
Is n italics dash th Roman or?
Yes. That actually, I typically keep it in Roman. I have it here in italic, and here's an interesting example. Where are we? Yeah, boy, I got a lot to go here, but I'm going to hit really highlights. Let's see. Where is the one? Here we go. Ith component. Okay, here it was done with italics. See, I would prefer that in Roman. Look at here, the I plus first component. See how that works out? Now you can do that if you raise the ST. Otherwise, you'd have to. If the ST was down the line, you have to put that in parentheses.
I have a question about when you decide to display things, put them out separately on a display kind of equation, when you just stick them in line.
Right. It's displayed usually when it's something that needs to be seen as it's important to be visualized in its totality. I guess we'll talk more about that later. People also display things when they're trying to make page format come out nicely, and sometimes the editors of my book, when they were in the old days, would when they were doing it by hand, they would display some formula that just had, it sort of said, and therefore X is a subset of something, and X was all by itself. It was just ridiculous, but they needed to fill out the, so I wrote a couple more sentences so that the page would be all right. Here's an example of two things in a row that's by adding P, K times to C. Notice that doesn't work, right? Okay. Here's let's divide the proof into two parts. First proving C and then proving P. I like that. Thought that was good. Let's see. Here it says the definition of LCP can be paraphrased as the subset of n to the n obtained by adding 0 or more indistinct elements of P to all elements of C, quote, period. Okay, now here I would have put the period inside. The quote, we talked about that. Indistinct elements isn't the right word. Possibly the same elements, but that detracts from the paraphrase, because the next sentence says the operative word here is 0. And so indistinct is just being crazy, being a strange word. It sounds like the operative word. So forget that. 0 or more elements, that's a red herring of the indistinct part. To all elements, the operative word here is 0. That's good. It's a nice way to phrase it. I would really like to read a book written by this person in general. And 0 here, the quote before the period, that's fine because that's the operative word. 0 itself is being quoted here, but somehow when we're quoting a sentence, I would put the period inside. Here it says the lemma is half proved. I love that. It's, in fact, it was the trivial part of the lemma, but okay. But anyway, I thought this was it is left to show that P is contained in A sub n, assume that P is not contained in A sub n, that is, assume there exists I probably would have put it that. Assume that there exists a vector such in P that is non-increasing. We will see that this leads to a contradiction. It's a very good transition paragraph. I said I would probably enjoy this. This future tense is okay if it's used consistently. Spelling is occasionally, I should say something about spelling. Argument here and people is not being able to spell is not a symptom of being unintelligent. It's just one of the varieties of intelligence that some people have, and that they don't see spelling errors, and other people do. And the people who do are offended by it. So the people who don't should learn how to cope with this by using spelling checkers and things like that. Otherwise, it'll not be okay. Well, let's see. It can be shown by contradiction that P is also contained in N. That's a good example of passive voice, which we improve by making it active. A proof by contradiction shows that P is also contained and things like that. Okay. Since we know that such is contained in A sub n, we don't know it necessarily. I don't know why we know that L of P. It was never assumed that we don't know things like that. So how are we doing on time here? I'm running out of time. But I promise not to do this anymore. After today. Well, let's see. What are the great... Here's somebody who wrote in all caps. It sounded to me like he was shouting the whole thing. But we got into subjective mood here. Suppose that there were some vector and so on, a subjunctive mood. It doesn't. I think you don't have to be so subjunctive there, and you would say that there is some vector or something like that. Oh, there's so much to say about these things. I'll have to boil it down into a shorter presentation. Well, but I promise next week that we will get off of that, even though I'm probably not half done yet. See you then.